Good morning, Jim Morgan. You're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy Daly. How are you this morning? It's rainy all day.
Yeah, dirty all day, but that's it by. Other than that, I'm doing grand. How about you?
Yeah, I know you are. The last little while, I'm following now what went on and what's going on and not going on regarding Nalcor and conflict of interest.
Okay.
Now, I have to say that it was obvious now there's no existing conflict of interest legislations or regulations in place governing Nalcor.
But now Ken Marshall would speak out and tell you that's not true. And he quotes some chapter and verse of the actual Code of Conduct and conflict of interest regulations in place currently at Nalcor, and while Miss Bennett was there too. So that's where we got a problem here, is the he said, she said stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm only following, I don't mind Ken Marshall. He's going to say what he wants to say on behalf of Ed Martin.
No, but he's quoting, he says one of the, just let me read this because it's important for our chat. He says, one of the guiding principles of the document, and this is the conflict of interest corporate governance structure in Nalcor. He says, one of the guiding principles of the document is any conflict of interest, whether real or perceived, regardless of its materiality, has the potential to impair the company's credibility and commercial interests. Employees, officers, and directors must perform their duties and responsibilities in a conscientious manner and shall not put themselves in a position where their private interests and those of the company might be or perceived to be in conflict. And this was in writing while Miss Bennett was on the board at Nalcor, and that's that's like corporate governance structure that I've seen everywhere else so far as conflict of interest. So he says it was in place.
Well, if Ken says it's in place, I've never seen it or heard of it before.
Yeah.
And so if it's in place, so to me it's strange that the chair of the board, Mrs. Bennett, that she's now saying there was no conflict of interest, and she brought it to the attention of the CEO, Mr. Martin, when she was their chair, because she was concerned about it. That was in 2012.
Yeah. Now, once again, I went back to read her quotes, and she was talking about having it tightened up to reflect a publicly traded private sector company, and she perceived there was some weakness in it. So it's not that it didn't exist, that she thought it could be tighter.
Well, according to her, she did meet with Mr. Martin after she was concerned about it, because the contract was awarded to a company, as you know, in New Brunswick. And I want to say up front this morning, I'm not criticizing Kathy Bennett on this. I'm criticizing the Nalcor itself. When the chair of the board is concerned about it enough to go to the Premier's office, and she says she did, and I believe Kathy Bennett, I give her full marks for doing what she did. She didn't break any law or rules and regulations. She took the whole issue of concern about being in a conflict where she had bought shares in a company which had earlier been given a contract in New Brunswick.
But now, was that the timeline either? Because she did not buy into an ownership position at Sunny Corner Enterprises until she was off of the board of Nalcor. So she was technically not even in a position to have been in a conflict, other if we talk about cooling off periods and that kind of stuff. But other than her direct overlap of timeline, she was not in that.
No, I agree with all of that. And like I said, I give full marks for her bringing it up and making it public, because she left a clear impression that she was so concerned about it, she went to the Premier's office and pointed out to the Premier the problems at the time, which was Mrs. Dunderdale, that this was a serious matter, and she didn't want to be perceived to be or get involved in anything which was in conflict with her being chair of the board or a member of the board.
Right, that's right.
So she was only clearing herself on the whole issue. And now I hear the present Premier, Mr. Marshall, out saying, yes, he's gone now just recently, within the last week or so, and sat down with Mr. Martin and asked him to look to do some reform with regards to the governance of Nalcor, especially with regards to conflict of interest. So if it's all there, as Ken Marshall says, now Ken is chair now, so he's going to say the things he wants to say maybe, but if it's there now, why is the Premier of the province now going to meet with 2 years has passed since Kathy Bennett brought it to the attention of the government, to the Premier, and to her boss, the chair of the board, CEO of the board. So what's he doing now? What's he asking him to do now? Reform the governance of Nalcor? It seems all strange to me. I'm not blaming Mrs. Bennett, but I'll say one thing. If there's no conflict of interest regulations in place, and it bloody well should be, 2 years ago it was brought to their attention, and now a number of the very big contracts and important contracts let We don't know if anybody from the board is involved there or not. There's no talk of anybody. I'm not saying there are any, but the possibility, according to Mrs. Bennett, was there then, 2012, and is there now. Because some of those big companies have got those big contracts. I mean, what was to stop the board of directors, any number of them, to get involved in buying shares of that company? I mean, to me, it's a most serious matter, especially when the Premier of the day, recently, and I have a lot of respect for Tom Marshall, there's no question about that, and he knows that. But, I mean, now he goes in and tells him, get cracking on this new governance reform you're talking about.
But now, can't some of that just be playing politics, though, too, Jim? Can't that some of that be playing politics? You'd be familiar with that. I mean, you're under scrutiny for one particular facet of policy, or whether it be this corporate structure at one of the Crown Corps. When there's questions of it, then the comments that should be coming from the Premier with any political savvies to say, okay, Mr. Martin, if there's more attention needs to be given to corporate governance, then why don't we go ahead and do exactly that? It just looks like you're trying to react and do the appropriate thing, whether it's needed or not. Like, I mean, I think that's part of it too.
Maybe you're right, but I mean, Miss Bennett did state, and I hear her quote was carried in the print media in particular. I don't know what she said to you people in the electronic media, but she said it in the print media, in the Telegram, that one of the reasons why she resigned from the board was because of the lack of governance of Nalcor.
Yeah, which I found to be quite an odd statement, but hey, that's hers, and she said it, so that's that, isn't it?
Well, I mean, she said it, and she was there as chairperson of the board for quite some time, and she's a credible person. Mm-hmm. And of course, she's now when she's in politics, and God bless her, because she's my member where I live in St. John's.
Yep.
But the thing, there's something wrong when shortly after that becomes public, what she had said. The Premier goes in and talks to Ed Martin and says, get on with the reform of the governance. You know, I mean, what is right, what is wrong? We'll never know, in my view. And I got to say it.
I think we will, because I'm going to ask them all, because I'm not done with this either, because I think it's important. And then I'm just reminded by an emailer, and this is absolutely true. Ken Marshall also goes on to say that Kathy Bennett was part of formulating the quoted conflict of interest guidelines when she was on the board. So there is once again another disconnect or a contradiction in the two positions that are being put forward. Sometimes the politics and the politicians and their commentary on it are satisfy their own agenda. But between Marshall and Bennett, there is a disconnect there, and we got to figure out why and exactly what's going on, because the perception can, unfortunately, trump reality sometimes. But I'd like to get down to the reality, what happened and when it happened.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because people are counting on you and some of these things to dig into it and get them on the line and get clarification. And I think clarification is wanted here now. Now, if Tom Mr. Marshall hadn't gone in and said to Ed Martin not too long ago, I think it was about 7 or 8 days ago, that he had gone in and met with Ed Martin to discuss this issue of the governance of Nalcor, and it was tying into the comments that Mrs. Bennett had made.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a very important thing for the people to know whether or not there's any strict conflict of interest, not legislation, regulations, because legislation was passed through the House of Assembly, as you know. So right now, I would say that it needs clarification, because it's confusing what people are saying. But when she says she resigned from the board, and she was in an important position, she was chair of the board of Nalcor, and she resigned, and one of the reasons was the fact that there was no reform and an unwillingness, this is her quote, an unwillingness of Nalcor to reform the governance of that company. And that's a very strong statement to make, coming from the position of former chair of the board.
I don't dispute it one bit. I'm going to formally here live and through email appropriately invite Mr. Marshall and Miss Bennett to speak to where some of the disconnects and contradictions lie, so we can get to the bottom of it. I think it's important to the voter because it's our money by and large. So I'm going to do exactly that, Jim, and hopefully that'll take place on the program tomorrow.
Right. In the meantime, I'll say to you, you're in a position, too, I think, to get clarification as to why it's taking so long for the Auditor General to look at a paving contract in Labrador, get the full details, and make it all public, so people can understand what did go on and what went on and why.
Yeah.
And I think it's time for that. Don't drag it out weeks and weeks and weeks, or maybe months until the next election or after. That's unfair to everybody. So I would say that's a question that the government's got to ask and get clarified. How long will the Auditor General, who's a fine man, I've talked to him a number of times in the past, how long will it take before he makes public what his findings are from his investigation into that Humber paving contract in Labrador, which was cancelled by government?
I couldn't agree more. It's questions we've asked, and we're still waiting for answers on timeline, whether we can expect a 60-day turnaround, which I think is legitimate. You can't rush it, and you have to do it right. So if it's a 60-day turnaround from when the Premier requested Mr. Padden have a look at this, I think that would be reasonable. But we'd like to confirm it, and we'd like to know what approach Mr. Padden is going to take and how much he's going to use the mandate and some of the legislation surrounding his abilities and authority, and what he's going to do to find out what went on here. I'm with you on that front.
Well, you know something, maybe I shouldn't be calling you so much, because we're agreeing. We never did agree on an awful lot.
No, we disagreed a little bit this morning, Jim, and don't you worry, we won't agree in full.
Oh, I know that. We're not going to agree 100% for sure.
No, that's part of it.
Anyway, have a good day. Take care.
Same to you, Jim. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.